I am back in Miami Shores for the last time before I leave for my trip, and I can honestly say that I think out of all the areas that I walked, I'm going to miss this place the most because it's usually so quiet over here. They have all these old trees that provide a ton of shade, which is nice when it's 100 degrees outside like it is again today. And it's just a beautiful neighborhood, guys. So I'll miss coming over here, but we're going to see a lot of other cool things along the way as well. Now, as you saw from the title of this video, the amount of money that was stolen and squandered during the pandemic is astronomical. And it is reported or estimated that the number could be around $200 billion of squandered money, which honestly at first glance to me sounds low when you consider that they basically printed $6 trillion during this time frame. But so many people complain that, oh, you're always picking on the student loan debt and the Biden loan forgiveness and all of this. Why don't you pick on people that stole all the PPP money and all this? Well, this video is for you guys, because anybody who steals money is going to get picked on this channel for sure. Now, this $200 billion of squandered pandemic funds is according to the SBA, which was in charge of doling out a bunch of small business loans during this time frame. But those small business loans were not forgiven. Those were loans that last a lifetime, like mortgages. They're 30-year loans that, had like a fixed interest rate over the life of the loan. The only way to get out of it is paying it back early, just like a mortgage. Now, so far, out of this $200 billion of stolen PPP money, about $30 billion of it has been reclaimed through the Inspector General's office, the SBA, and the Secret Service, all working in tandem on this. And the fraud took place on these two different loan programs, which you've probably heard of during the pandemic. One was PPP, which was the Paycheck Protection Program. And then we also had the EIDL loans, which are Economic Injury Disaster loans. And according to this report, more fraud actually took place in the EIDL program, which was a low interest rate disaster loan that would later require repayment. The Inspector General's office right now is estimating $136 billion of the fraud is in the EIDL program. And the crazy part is that number equals about 33% of the money that was dispersed to businesses through this program, guys. So they're saying up to a third of all the money given out through the EIDL loans was probably taken fraudulently. But they're saying the fraud rate for the PPP money was actually a lot lower, because this was money that was given to businesses and would later be forgiven, just like a grant. And the estimate of fraud is about $64 billion, which was about 8% of the PPP money that they sent out to people. And basically this report says that all this emergency funding basically saved the economy. And I agree, it probably did. And we would have had a huge crash in everything if they didn't send out all this money, which, looking back in hindsight, probably would have been the better thing to happen, because now we're dealing with the total opposite problem with high inflation that is stubborn and is not wanting to go down. And now we have record high prices on everything: cars, houses, food, goods and services, you name it. Everything costs far more than it did before. But hey, people got PPP loans and EIDL money. And they're saying one of the reasons that there was so much fraud is because in an emergency situation like we had, there's a lot of pressure to approve loans quickly. And when you screen the loans too carefully, or you have too many fraud prevention measures in place, it can prolong the amount of time that it takes to approve any one of these loans, which in a situation like we had during the pandemic would have been counterproductive from what they were trying to achieve. They basically were trying to get the money out to people as quickly as possible without doing too much due diligence, and no wonder we had so much fraud. Even the SBA admits here that by October 2020, they pretty much lowered their guard and were approving loans a lot quicker than they probably should have been. But now they're looking back on this decision and realizing it probably wasn't the greatest idea to just dole out all this money and have it get fraudulently stolen in the end. So now they're regretting this decision. And my question is, what's going to happen to all this money that they do reclaim, guys? Okay, let's say they reclaim half of it, $100 billion. That's still a drop in the bucket compared to what the budget is for our government, considering how much they spend. But what do you think they're going to do with that money? You know, they're talking about trying to reclaim a lot of this money and get some of it back. But what's the end game? Are they going to put this towards what? Our national debt, $31 trillion? $100 billion wouldn't even put a dent in it. And if it's confirmed that it was in fact $200 billion of PPP money that got squandered and stolen during this time, this would set a new national record for the amount of fraud, which just goes to show you, where people are at today, guys. Everyone wants to get something for nothing, and let's just steal it is pretty much the attitude now. But the SBA is also saying at the same time, well, this report might have some flaws in it, and this might be an overestimate of how much fraud actually happened and how much money was actually stolen. Like, how do they actually find this out, guys? How can they really know how much of it was fraud and how much of it wasn't? Because people who are really good at pulling off fraud, I'm sure the whole idea is to make it look legit. The SBA is saying that no, the amount of fraud is probably closer to $36 billion across both PPP and EIDL loans. That's out of $400 billion of suspicious funds. So they're saying basically a little less than 10% of the amount of money that they're investigating is probably actually going to end up being fraudulent. And the Inspector General's office is saying that not only was it likely that we had this $200 billion of money stolen, but also individual Americans were defrauded along the way because people stole people's identities. They used people's social security numbers and tax ID numbers to apply for these loans fraudulently to begin with, and people ended up getting these loans that they never should have gotten because they were using other people's information with this. The worst part is if somebody did use your social security number or your tax ID number fraudulently to get one of these loans and you don't know about it by now, then this can have an impact on your business or your credit report. Not to mention the hassle that you have to go through to try and get rid of this. The report mentions that there are roughly 70,000 social security numbers that are under suspicion that were probably used to get these loans fraudulently. So they basically took other people's social security numbers, applied for these loans, got them under someone else's name. Now the Biden administration is promising help on this. They're saying that they're going to help victims of identity fraud with this, reclaim their identity and get back on track with it. But it's still the amount of stress and hassle that you have to go through in order to even deal with something like this is tremendous. But still, guys, I think that this number is probably way underestimated. When you look at that they actually printed $6 trillion during this time frame and you're telling me only 200 billion of it was stolen, I would say probably more on the order of close to half. That would be my guess. Now, so far the Justice Department has brought cases and criminal charges against about 2,230 defendants related to these pandemic fraudulent crimes. And so far this has led to 803 arrests and 539 convictions. So I don't know, what do you think? To me, guys, this sounds like this number is just way too low. Like the amount of people who are actually getting pinched for this right now seems far lower than it should be, especially 3 years after the fact. Like, once people started getting these loans, I think it's all grossly underestimated, and there should be way more arrests and fraud investigations in the future. And guess what? Another way that we know that there's a lot more fraud than that going on, because one of the reasons that home prices shot up so much during the pandemic now is also because of the PPP and EIDL loan fraud. University of Texas has been researching this. They have concluded that the fraud related to the PPP program was widespread enough in the United States to increase real estate prices within certain US zip codes. On average, you saw home prices go up 5.7% higher than in comparable low fraud zip codes in the same county. So you have two counties right next to each other and one had more fraud than the other. Home prices went up 5.7 percentage points higher on average. So what does that tell you? And what the research shows is that people who fraudulently received PPP money were significantly more likely to purchase a home with that money than people who actually got these loans legitimately, and that ultimately drives up the home prices for everyone around them. Makes sense, right? We just talked about the other day how much remote work had an impact on home prices going up across the country. When people can take, their big tech salaries and buy in a relatively affordable area, that changes the local housing market dramatically. But throw in a ton of free money, we're talking $6 trillion, who knows how much of it was actually stolen. And look what happened to home prices, guys. You're telling me that was all legitimate? I don't think so. So my next question is not only how are they reclaiming this money and what are they doing with the reclaimed money, but if they figured out somebody used these funds fraudulently to buy a home, are they going to repossess that house? Because they should. House was bought with money that didn't belong to them, stolen money. So essentially the house doesn't belong to them, right? It belongs to the American people. Taxpayers who are footing the bill for all this. So you can see with this that just like homeowners insurance, when the cost of something skyrockets, guys, it's either because of corruption, fraud, or both. The homeowners insurance problem is just as big of a problem as all of this stolen money is. And look what's the common denominator here: fraud. Okay, fraud caused home prices to go up as much as they have. Fraud caused our cost of living and inflation to go up as much as it has. And we also have insurance, billions and trillions of dollars stolen from insurance companies using fraudulent methods, which has caused so many of them to go out of business or close up shop, which has made the cost of homeowners insurance skyrocket. So in the end, who pays for all this fraud? You and I do. Now, Steve sent me this story about universal default, and I'm about ready to hire Steve as one of my part-time content curators because he sends me so many good stories. So thanks again for this one, Steve. And this one is about universal default. And what is universal default? This is when, let's say you have a couple different credit cards, you have a car loan and a mortgage, right? Well, if you go late on any one of those, for example, like say you don't pay your car loan on time, or you make a late payment on one credit card and you pay the other one off on time, well then your other credit card that you made payments on time to has the ability to raise your interest rate just because you defaulted or paid late on a separate loan product. It doesn't have to be anything to do with that credit card. It's something they had the legal right to do according to your card member agreement. Now, the only good thing about this, if this actually happens to you, is the credit card companies can only raise your interest rate on new purchases. So say you're carrying $10,000 in credit card debt, which would be awful, but a lot of people do it, and your old interest rate was 15%, but you defaulted on that credit card or another card, and now they raise your rate to 28%. Well, that 28% interest rate is only going to apply to the new charges you put on the card. So say you stop using the card and you don't put any new charges on it, you could still keep your 15% rate paying off the debt that you have on it. Also, the maximum rate right now for credit cards is 30% interest. They can't go beyond that. And if they're going to raise your interest rate to that maximum amount, they have to give customers a 45-day notice in writing before they do it. To me, this is just another reminder to pay your bills on time, guys. And I'll bet you this is going to apply to the student loan debt as well. Everybody that we talked about the other day that says, well, I'm just not going to make the payments when the payments resume in October, what's going to happen to your credit cards? Maybe they're going to start charging you extra interest, and this may not just apply to credit cards. There could be other type of loans that might be able to do this as well. And speaking of the student loan debt, one last thing to talk about with this is that Elizabeth Warren came out and said that President Biden has the full legal authority to actually cancel the student loan debt like he's trying to do, and the Supreme Court should be making the right decision, which is to actually let this student loan debt cancellation go through, because it's within his legal right to do this. But the fear is that the Supreme Court is playing politics, and that's why it's not going to happen. But like I said before, guys, even if they let this happen, even if the student loan debt forgiveness goes into place and they cancel $20,000 of everybody's student loan debt, that's going to help some people out tremendously, and other people, it's not even going to put a dent in the amount that they owe, because like we talked about in the student loan video last week, you know, people owe hundreds of thousands of dollars, and these interest rates compounding the balances. And let's not forget, starting September 1st, the interest will start compounding once again on people's balances. So however high it is now, it's going to go even higher, especially if you don't make payments. And without getting into too much discussion about it, there's a lot of ethics questions that come into play with this too, you know, like everybody who already paid off student loans, you know, that had to work 3 jobs and eat rice and beans every day in order to do it. Well, what happens to those people? They didn't get any student loan forgiveness, they just paid off their debt. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. So I don't know if it's going to happen. My guess is probably not, especially when they talk about playing politics, right? Because playing politics, to me, just means that they're going to make the decision that makes the Supreme Court look good politically, right? So the odds of this going through are probably slim to none. That's what I'm thinking. But there's also some other legal nuances to this argument in the court case as well that I'm not going to even get into, because this is not a legal channel. We're not going to discuss that. But Elizabeth Warren does bring up a good point, because she said that back when she went to college and she was younger, it only cost $50 a semester at community college. And fast forward today, obviously the prices are astronomical, and it's estimated that college costs 200% more than it did back then, which to me, guys, is just completely insane. And obviously there's fraud and corruption involved with this, just like we talked about earlier, right? When you see the price of something go up so dramatically like that, what's the reason? Fraud and corruption. We know this is the case with student loans as well. And it's just sad that fraud and corruption has literally infiltrated every single aspect of our American institutions, you know, like businesses, people, schools, doesn't really matter. It's all based on fraud now. Everything is stolen. Basically, people just can't be trusted to do the right thing. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check this one out right on the screen over here, and I will see you in the next one.